Welcome everyone. Welcome to this session of Forced Migration in the Arts, where we are looking at urban and rural racism in the UK. For today, the conversation today is taking place in two parts. In the first session, the one that we are having now, will be in conversation with Doctors Rachel Keighley and Viji Kuppan, who are researchers at the University of Leicester, and where they are working on the Rural Racism Project towards an inclusive countryside. The project is exploring the causes, nature, and effects of racism, which is experienced by racialized and minoritized people who are living and working in England or who are visiting rural England. After that, starting at 4:30 p.m., we will have what do asylum seekers and refugees make of far-right violence in the UK, which is going to be the second part of a conversation we started with poets Lorraine Masiam Ponela and Dadirai Tsopo. The conversation started last month, and we are continuing the conversation today. So with this as the introduction, or maybe before I do that, I should also say that forced migration in the arts itself is an international network that brings together people with lived experience of forced migration, refugee and non-refugee artists, activists, academics, and art spaces. And we meet once a month for conversation, looking at work taking place at the intersection where forced migration in the arts meet. The network encourages mutual support and collaboration. And this conversation on racism fits perfectly with the themes that the network is exploring for reasons that we will discuss elsewhere. So with this as the introduction, I'll say a few words about our two speakers, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation before we hear a presentation from Viji. Our first speaker, the two speakers are Rachel Keighley, who is chair of the BSc Ed Crime Network and a research associate at the University of Leicester. And Viji, similarly, is currently at the same university where he works as a researcher on the Rural Racism Project. With this as our introduction, maybe I turn to you, Rachel and Viji. Is there anything that you'd like to add to this introduction?
Do you want to go first, Viji, or shall I?
No, please, Rachel, you go first.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Ambrose. I think, yeah, you described the work that I'm currently doing very well. I think the only thing to add is, I guess, a little bit about my background. So the background to my research journey, I guess, is in LGBTQ plus online hate. I've then also worked on research projects looking at modern slavery and sexual exploitation. So a lot of the work I do is within the field of hate crime or marginalised identities. And it's just been an absolute privilege to work alongside the team on this rural racism project for the past year and for the next year. I'll hand over to you, Viji, as well.
Thank you. And thank you, Ambrose, for inviting us today. That's, yeah, it's brilliant to see so many people as well. So thank you all for coming. Yes, my my research, my writing, my thinking has been influenced by critical race studies and feminist intersectionality. I have I suppose I'm an ethnographer and that thinks about kind of everyday life. So I've written about the intersections of football fan culture, for example, through the prism of race, disability, and gender. Involved in a project at the moment at the National Football Museum, which is looking at the Black presence in football, and is looking to kind of celebrate that presence over a long period of time. I've most recently written in a book called Blackness at the Intersection, which is an edited collection with Kimberly Crenshaw. Yeah, I don't want to go on anymore, really. I think that's fine. That gives you a sense, I think, of who I am. In terms of what we might today, I'm just going to try and give a short overview if we speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then maybe we'll have a deeper conversation about the work of the Rural Racism Project and some of the things that we've been finding out. So yeah, thank you, Ambrose.
Thank you. So before we go to the presentation, maybe and this is for you, both of you, maybe if you could say something about racism and the countryside, and also the way in which the various fields that you've been working intersect with the question.
Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to go first. Yeah, so I think for me, I think maybe talking a little bit about my background coming to this project might be relevant in order to answer that question. So I grew up in Yorkshire. I've always lived in rural spaces in Yorkshire, and I think if anyone else here has also grown up in rural spaces, you'll know how white they are, how white British they are, and that narrative you get taught implicitly and sometimes explicitly about white rural spaces and what they're supposed to mean to British people, and the small print or sometimes the large print within that is white British people. And I think I'm a criminologist and a sociologist by trade. So a lot of the work I've done around hate crime has been about marginalization, discrimination, and I'm particularly interested in the ways that individuals hierarchize different identities according to those that are more favorable to the quote unquote norm, which will be the white, cisgendered, able-bodied, heterosexual individual, and how the rest of us are categorized beneath that as inferior. And so one of the things that I'm also really passionate about is researchers' activism and making social change. And so I've worked alongside some of the leaders on this project before with previous projects. And I thought, when I heard about the project and thinking about racism and the way the narratives of rural spaces in England and in Britain are built to be these white British spaces, what can I do as a white person who occupies those spaces, who is guilty of living in and benefiting from a white supremacist racist system? What can I do to fight against that, to educate myself and to educate others? So that's where I came to this project, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that today in the ways that I've tried to utilize and unpack and unlearn and challenge my white privilege and the white privilege of others who I've spoken to in these spaces. But I think if I start with that caveat, maybe Viji, you can say a little bit more about the project and the Rural Racism Project. Oh, I think you're on mute, Vij.
Sorry about that. Yeah, maybe it would just be at this point, it'd just be a good idea to roll into that presentation.
Yeah,
and
but
I think I'll be able to speak to this a little bit more clearly.
yeah, but before we do that, Viji, maybe you could also comment on the same the issues from where you're coming from.
Yeah. Okay. No, sure. So I think for myself as an older brown disabled man, I have had, I suppose, the privilege of, even though I'm from a working class background, both my factories in Leicester. I got exposure to the rural at at quite a young age, and I think that Leicester at that particular time, we lived in the in the suburbs, miles outside of Leicester, so there was a lot of green spaces. So I feel like I've had access to the countryside in different ways. I mean, places like I would go into the Derbyshire Hills on school trips. I've lived out in Derbyshire, and I've lived in rural kind of Hampshire. So there's ways in which I feel that I am entangled, I suppose, in this work, and I was drawn to it because of my personal kind of experiences of racism in the countryside, some of which I've spoken about before. So for me, there's a deep connection both with the rural and with racialized people that live, work, and visit these spaces. Yeah, like that.
And can you also say something about whiteness, white supremacy, and this racial hierarchy from your perspective as someone who is of South Asian background?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the countryside, I think, in many respects, is kind of is structured in many ways. It's both structured and patterned by white supremacy. We don't really kind of see it, I think, because it's not some. It's almost as if it's hidden in plain sight in many ways. And I'm thinking, particularly of the country house, for example, and the ways in which colonialism is embedded within the foundations, really, of these places. And I think also for the families that have been, enriched by slavery and by colonialism, they still occupy these places. I think its hold upon the rural, but also on the society in which we live, is something that needs to be kind of confronted, and white people, I think, need to be encouraged to think about their privilege. Yeah, like that.
How about South Asian people of Asian backgrounds?
Well, yeah, no, I think that's an interesting question. I think that for South Asians, they, in terms of kind of hierarchy, we could say that they're not always located at the bottom. Oftentimes they're located within the middle, and so there are ways in which brown people would be considered closer to whiteness at certain points in time, and that brown or South Asian people can also be oppressors and use their status to both look down and denigrate black people in particular. I would say So, do you know, I think there's a certain amount of reflexivity that I, as a brown researcher, need to have in these spaces and places, and I'm kind of acutely aware of my privileges. So yeah.
And before we come back to your presentation, how about you, Rachel? Can you also say something about this hierarchy, and also what we mean when we talk about whiteness, white supremacy, and also what we mean when we talk about Black people? Who are we talking about? Who are we calling Black?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I think it speaks to the ways that humans categorize in order to retain power. I think if we think about hierarchies, they're intersectional. So I think we need to think, as Viji's spoken on there, about hierarchies of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class, all these different ways that people are hierarchized, to not repeat a word, but I'm going to have to, where one is seen as on top, is seen as the thing you want to attain toward, and anyone that's diverts in any way from that norm is seen as less than, inferior, beneath you. And I think that's the way that white supremacy in our capitalist neoliberal society works. It works because there are people on top and there are people who are below. And I'm not saying that that's right, but I'm saying from the perspective of white supremacy, that's how it has been formulated. It is to have that hierarchy so that people on top can control, can have privilege, can have power, can have more. And to your point about, defining and the labels that we give people in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity, if we're talking about other identities as well, we label things both in order to understand, in order to belong. So categories and labeling can be useful for particular identity groups to identify with, but I think they work within the context of white supremacy to define someone as adverse from that norm. So white supremacy works because whiteness is seen as power, it's seen as privilege, it's seen as control. And so you need to have an anti-whiteness in order to say what whiteness is for white supremacy to work. And I think, that's what the literature says, and that's what we see within the way our government works, that whiteness is superior. And I think it's a little bit like what you were talking about there, Viji, in terms of people can be interpolated and understood as being white if they manage to be close to that norm or try and contort themselves into that norm in order to survive. Because of the fact that if you don't survive, you're in the out group, and then you are going to be discriminated against, you're going to be made inferior. I don't know if you had anything to add, Viji, or if there's anything you wanted me to add on that, but yeah, I think it's a complex one, but
I think I'm good with that.
Just the question, who are we calling Black?
Who in this context of our research or just in a wider landscape?
Both.
I'll answer that then. I'll answer that. In this particular context, we're using the term Black to reference people of African heritage, most specifically. So, I call myself brown within this context. So yeah.
And what does that labeling do?
What does that labeling do? Well, I think that it helps us to speak to the specificities of racialization and racism, and helps us to kind of understand the ways in which people are differently, but also similarly interpolated. Yeah.
How about you, Rachel? What does that labeling do, in your view?
I think it's quite a complex question, actually, and an important one, because I think for different people, it does different things. So I think, as I said before, it gives a voice and a community and identity to people who have an affinity with that label, who want to form a community. So if we're talking about, not wanting to use overarching terms that don't look at that nuance and specificity that people have within their identities. I think the label Black can be a powerful tool for the Black community. However, I think if you're looking at it from a perspective of whiteness, there are white people who will use that term in a derogatory manner, in a misunderstood manner, to cover a whole different host of nuance of racialized beings because they are seeking to other, and so they will categorize in a dismissive way. And I think we see it in different identity groups as well, the ways that labels can hold so much power in one instance and to one person, and can be so marginalizing and discriminatory in others. So I realize that's not the easiest answer, but I think that complexity is important.
And I think I just want to also just come back in on that. I think that the participants and partners in this project will actually use the term Black, Brown, South Asian, whatever that is. They will all use these terms in different ways. And there'll be some people in our research that see that could be of African heritage, that see it and have a much more capacious understanding of Blackness, in which people of non-white people, shall we say, are included within that kind of category. So I think the term is complex and it's contested. I think I was trying to show the ways that I was actually using that within my kind of framing.
Thank you. And are there other terms that you'll be using in the research that maybe you might want to share with us, and then we go to the presentation?
Yeah, I think this is actually a conversation we've had as a team. I think some people have used terms minoritized ethnic individuals. Some people have used the term global majority, which I've seen in the chat. Other people have used people of color. And I think what's been really interesting and shows the tensions within these categories and labels is that there isn't a one size fits all. And I would be really keen to hear people's feedback and thoughts on this, because of the fact that we've used a particular term in a certain circumstance and someone has said, well, that isn't how I identify. That term is exclusionary to me. I would rather use this term. So we'll think, oh, that's the term I'm supposed to adopt, whether that's global majority, for example. You'll go to someone else and they'll say, no, I don't want you to use global majority. That's really offensive to me. Please use person of color. So I think there's a lot of nuance, a lot of complexity, a lot of grace that needs to be given in spaces for people to self-identify. And I think when we come to, when we think and we're learning on verbally speaking on this project, and when we're writing on this project, I think giving a lot of credence to and thought and reflexivity to the use of those terms is something that's really important to us, because of the fact that I have not yet found a universal term that everyone agrees and is comfortable with for them. And as a white person, I am not the person that should be deciding what term someone else should identify with. So I'm not the person that should have the answer for that. I should be taking leave from people on how they would like themselves to be defined.
How about you, Viji? Is there anything you'd like to say on this?
No, I mean, I think that on that point that Rachel made, I mean, I think racialized minorities, minoritized ethnic communities, I like to use those two words, and people of color. And I use the word racialized or racializing and minoritized because they're active terms, and they communicate a sense that the process of racialization is an active and ongoing process. So yes.
Thank you. So we're going to hear Viji's presentation now. If you've got questions, you can put them in the chat, and then after the presentation, we have a bit of a conversation. So over to you, Viji.
Thank you. Just in the interests of time, I am going to I'm just going to read this presentation, which has actually covered some of the points we've already started to make. So the Rural Research Project is a 2-year Leverhulme funded study, and we've completed 12 months of the project. So we finished the discovery phase, if you like, and we've just started analysing the research materials. So before I begin discussing this work, I do want to say that we're going to talk a lot about racism today and racial trauma. Racial trauma is real, and it might be triggering for some of you. So take care. If you feel that you need to take a break, then please do so. So there are 3 elements to the Rural Racism Project that are divided into experiences, expressions, and backlash. They're all interrelated, and I'm going to give you an overview, the big picture, if you like, give you a sense of our work, purpose, problems, and possibilities. So let's briefly deal with each one. First of all, examining how racism is experienced by people from minoritized ethnic backgrounds, living, working, and visiting rural spaces. Exploring the forms this racism takes, where it occurs, and investigating the ways it impacts on individuals, their families, and wider communities. We've done this, and that's primarily Rachel and myself, through face, online, and walking interviews. Secondly, examining the historic, cultural, and symbolic expressions of racism that I briefly kind of touched on that exist in the countryside. For example, the ways in which slavery, colonialism, indentureship, and empire are hidden in plain sight in our idyllic country houses, pubs, memorials, statues, street and place and family names. Thirdly, examining the backlash to talking about race and racism in rural environments. A big part of this package is to do with discourse analysis, and actually one of our colleagues, Adrian Yip, spent some time doing this. It has also involved speaking to white people how they think and feel about the presence of racialized minorities in the countryside, and speaking to white people about their racism or the racism they witness. A distinctive feature of our research is that we have undertaken well over 100 in-depth conversations with Black, Brown, and other Asian British communities, as well as white British people across the length and breadth of England. So just to say that this project focused very much on England, and we really didn't look at Wales or Scotland. In addition, we're working with a cohort of 20 community research partners who are providing expert knowledge about race and rurality, and also providing creative responses to the work that we're doing. We're also speaking to further invisibilized ethnic groups, such as Gypsy, Roma, and Trevor people, members of the Jewish community, Eastern European seasonal agricultural workers, and refugees and asylum seekers. Our community research partners are engaged in producing blogs, collages, films, photographs, podcasts, the one we're on now, poems, pottery, or other forms of art-based media that talks back to racism in some way. For example, highlighting the racist history of a place and or a racist, sexist incident that happened to them or someone that they know. And or equally importantly, I think, for grounding their connectedness and belonging in countryside spaces and places. Our CRPs are a diverse group of people who are artists, activists, academics, and more. They have knowledge and experience of the countryside. They inhabit many identities beyond being black, brown, Asian, Roma, mixed, other, white. We want to take this research out of the university and make it more inclusive and get people thinking and talking about how welcoming and unwelcoming rural environments can be for racialized minorities. Another distinctive feature of our project is that we understand that racism can be traumatic and can leave its mark on the body. So we recently applied for and have been successful in getting a small amount of additional funding to address the emotional harm done by racism. This new and important component of our work was developed from discussions with CRPs. The first element is really offering one-to-one counselling sessions for our participants and community research partners. The second stems from a recognition that racism in a rural context is often isolating. So we are offering a set of group workshops for our participants and partners that provide the opportunity to assemble and process issues arising from racism and their work with us. Lastly, our research team will participate in a reflexive anti-racist practice which reaches beyond process-orientated meetings about milestones and deliverables and will seek to address the complicated and messy affectivities of researching racism, a dimension of the research experience that is often omitted from formal project discussions. And in fact, we have actually already started that. This includes, for example, reflecting on the racialized, gendered, and other power dynamics which exist among team members, as well as between researchers and research participants. All the different sessions that I've outlined are with accredited counsellors, psychotherapists of colour, with an in-depth knowledge of working with races and its intersections. I want to talk for a few moments about some of the negative impact of working on this project has had for me personally. So I wrote an opinion piece for our online journal, The Citizen Rights, at the beginning of this study. Personal, it was political, and showed the ways as a racialized other I was entangled in this work. John Craven, some of you may know him from Countryfile or even Newsround, a journalist and reporter, and interviewed me, and subsequently wrote his own piece on rural racism, based heavily on what I had shared and written our study. Whilst it garnered support, it also generated a great deal of hostility. I'm sure I can just leave you to read this. I mean, this tweet, or whatever it's called now, received 52,000 views and 84,000 likes, and was reposted and commented on hundreds of times.
Sorry, Vij, maybe you could read the extracts as well.
Yeah, no,
for
sure.
those who will be
Sure.
listening.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I'm asking is, what does a discussion of racism and the countryside provoke? And so one of the tweets that that came out that I'm suggesting that was like 52,000 times, said it was inevitable a paper like this would be engineered to prove, in inverted commas, the countryside is racist. Indian heritage researcher Dr. Viji Kuppan, he, him, loving the pronouns, believes so. The BBC's John Craven wrote, some of the results so far are disturbing. Well, Dr. Kuppan is the problem, as bad as 10,000 anti-Semites chanting for the genocide of Jews Saturday afternoon. So that was posted on the 24th of March this year. So, you know, the John Craven article was reported on in the Telegraph, the Times, and the Daily Mail. It received something like 4,000 below the line comments across the editions. Now I've researched, taught, and written about race and its intersections over the past 10 years, but I've never experienced such and hostility. And what I'm sharing is just a tip of a much deeper seam of racism. So this a quote from the below the line Telegraph said, "It's not even enough that we become a minority in our own cities to third world ethnicities, but through the usual and trusted liberal weasel vocabulary of inclusion and diversity, we will now have millions of third worlders rambling around our English countryside. The stated intent of the Asian academic from an Asian dominated town and university is that black and brown people belong in the countryside. They don't." So yeah. I mean, John Craven's piece gave rise also to a number of radio discussion programs. For example, the BBC's Antisocial and David Lammy speaking on BBC. Now, Lammy, John Craven, and myself are all fair-minded and measured in our thoughts and observations. But this is the retort to David Lammy from somebody on X. So, in other words, blacks choose urban areas. Blacks can't afford rural areas. Rural areas have avoided cultural enrichment, in quotes. Blacks cannot farm the land. Too much work and skill involved. It's not racism, you mug. It's the true English countryside and not the ghetto stereotype. So, why this pronounced hostility? Why the distortion, the denial, the obfuscation, racial ridicule? I'm going to suggest that it's partly to do with white privilege, what Peggy McIntosh described as the invisible package of unearned assets. Moreover, racial violence, whether that be physically or discursively enacted, is not the sole domain of the stereotypical far-right skinhead. We forget the supposedly liberal white professional at our peril. The Times or the Telegraph reader hide in plain sight, as does the white middle-class National Trust female volunteer that maybe Rachel will speak to a little bit later on. The countryside is romanticized as this timeless, Arcadian, virtuous, natural environment. So to speak of race or racism is to stain her virtue, and in a white supremacist society, that cannot be countenanced. I quote from the preface to our colleague, Professor Corinne Fowler's new book, Island Stories, Walk Through Colonial Britain. The British countryside occupies a special place in the national imagination. Long seen as a place of idyllic seclusion and retreat from urban life, the countryside symbolizes the soul of Britain. Well over a century ago, the poet, writer, A.E. Houseman, while working in London, saw the Shropshire Hills as a land of lost content, a place of almost prelapsarian innocence. For many today, the countryside, its fields, its picturesque villages, its stately homes, surrounded by their beautifully landscaped ground, represents something steadfastly reassuring, something has existed since time immemorial. Indeed, it is hard to exaggerate the depth of feeling about the British countryside, which is attached to ideas of nationhood as though by an umbilical cord. Let me tell you that the uproar and lament over the changing face of the English countryside has been going on since Wordsworth and William Cobbett, and goes back to the 18th century and even before. But there are many rurals. It is not unchanging. It is not this unchanging bucolic landscape. It never was. On the contrary, it has always been in motion. We now see European agricultural workers in Lincolnshire, for example, and asylum seekers and refugees in rural Dorset and West Cumbria. Racial antagonists often say to us, "You have a fixed agenda," and want to represent the countryside as racist. But in fact, we are trying to reflect a much more nuanced picture. Black, brown, and Asian folk and their white allies increasingly choose to live, work, and spend their leisure time in rural spaces. There is no doubt that racism is a durable feature of countryside encounters and interactions. However, one of our partners, a Black woman that I was recently in conversation with, while acknowledging the difficulties of racism, asserts her right and connection to be in these places. She says, "It really fucks me off as well, because I'm from North Wales. I'm from the really deep rural. For them to tell me I'm not welcome or I'm not a person who belongs in that space makes me furious. I love being on the mountain so much. I just have the absolute sense of synergy with place and being. I am utterly myself, utterly connected to that space. I feel an affinity and connection with the landscape." Her comments are not unique. Our participants' voices reflect that despite racist hostility, we are just here to stay, here to fight. And the colonial history of empire shows our presence in this land over centuries. I suggest that this knowledge and gives us a stake in this country. I just want to finish by reading a poem, which is one of the kind of creative responses from one of our CRPs, who's a white woman that is supporting the asylum seekers on the home in Portland, which I think has now actually been decommissioned, and those asylum seekers and refugees will be moving on. But it's a really powerful and moving piece. And she writes, "Portland, you brought out the best in us, a groundswell of decency, its nucleus, a throbbing heart of kindness, the arteries of which spread out into our community, people united by a need to support those who, by no fault of their own, found themselves confined to little more than a barge, a prison, a pen. Hearts, home, stories, food, land, tears shared, lifelong friendships forged. People with little monetary wealth giving to those with nothing at all. And those with nothing at all gave back. They really gave their all." They told us their stories, forever etched in our psyche, the treacherous journeys to escape persecution and death. The men who came to find the man who came home to find his village massacred. The man whose sisters were confined to their homes by the Taliban, their education, jobs, voices, future denied them. The man tortured by electric shocks. The man with faces bearing invisible yet evident scars of trauma. The men with families, homes, professions, lives they did not want to leave, had no choice. The men whose collective gentle resilience knew no limits. The men who gave so much to our community, volunteering at charity shops, gardens, museums, allotments, picking up the discarded litter of those who mocked them, didn't understand, or worse, hated them. Because Portland, you are ugly too. Those who used words like invasion, vermin, rape, murder, those who invented stories to discredit them, those who told women who showed kindness they deserved to be raped, that they were prostitutes and would be hounded off our island, those who said they would be ground down until they committed suicide, a graphic suggestion of what form it should take, who use words like woke, loonies, lefties, do-gooders, cult members, government plants, those with heads full of conspiracy theories. But it was more serious than that. People of colour photographed on buses, accusations of abductions, asylum seekers accused of photographing children, a dog kicked to death, a rumour that schoolgirls will be issued with rape alarms, the man with a doctorate who said, "Who are these people they speak of? They are not me." GB News who accused, encouraging them to spread their fake news. A photo of Leonard Faruko, doctored to include Gary Glitter standing beside him. The implication that a young man driven to suicide by his situation was a paedophile. Imagine that, if you will. Such hatred from those who live in our midst. But the kindness drowned the echo chamber of hate. The men are going. Soon all will be gone. We will remember them with affection, the men with pure hearts and minds, who left to continue their journey, knowing on this island there was love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viji. I think you mentioned that Rachel was going to add something. So maybe if you've got things to add, and then we go into the questions and answers. Rachel.
Yeah, it was just more, it'll just be if it comes up, I guess, in the questions. It wasn't a physical presentation. It was just looking at the ways that racism manifests in country homes. So I guess I'll talk about it now briefly. So one of the things Viji and I have done together over the past year, 12 months, is go into rural spaces together and do some critically reflective autoethnographic work, looking at how race and racism works within rural spaces in England. And what we were particularly interested in are the ways that our divergent identities were hierarchized within those systems and places we went. So, you know, as Viji described himself, and then as I described myself as a younger, queer, white, feminine presenting woman, we were really interested to see the ways that those identities were hierarchized and which one held the most power in what moments. And race was always the defining factor, if you like, of who held power. It was always myself. And we visited a lot of country homes. So one of the country homes we visited was in Yorkshire, which is very near where I live. I grew up going with my parents, and this particular country home had a temporary exhibit on David Harewood. So the home was Harewood House, and David Harewood, the actor, actually didn't know until maybe 10 years ago that his surname came from one of his great-great-grandparents having worked on the plantations that were owned by Harewood House. And one thing that Harewood House had wanted to do was to try and have a reckoning with their colonial past and try and work towards an anti-racist future. Also, they said, so Viji and I went to visit the home at the time that they had this temporary David Harewood exhibition on, and there was 3 different moments when walking through that house where Viji experienced racism from the volunteers, the white female volunteers at that house who were supposed to be engaging in anti-racism, who were talking about this exhibition that they had on. And it was just the ways that in one breath, this house and this collective of people were talking about the importance of anti-racism and recognizing the fact that we need to talk about the legacy of colonialism and the British Empire, and then in the next breath would perpetrate racism in various different ways. And we're happy to talk about that more, but I think that's just shows the power of the conflict and the hypocrisy within white people. And I'm not separating myself from that. I fully recognize that there are ways in which I perpetrate racism, and Viji and I have spoken about this in the ways that within those moments in the house, we didn't know how to react to the volunteers when they had perpetrated racism and how we were supposed to challenge them within those moments, especially as researchers on a project trying to capture racism, but you're also trying to be anti-racist and call out racism. How do you reconcile those tensions as a researcher, as an anti-racist? And that's something that we've reflected on together and will continue to do so. But I think that was, yeah, probably just a really important experience to bring up.
So maybe as a lead into the Q&A, maybe if both of you could talk about that incident, what happened and how did you deal with it? Also, why do you think it is possible? How is it possible that on the one hand, the volunteers can claim to be doing anti-racist work and at the same time be racist? How did we get here?
Well, that's a really, really interesting question that I don't know that I have necessarily the answers to at all. But I think that was the National Trust. In fact, it wasn't a national trust property, Harewood House. It's the current Lascelles Lord, or I'm not sure what he currently gives himself, has certainly done some kind of soul searching, and there are certainly anti-racist cultures that run through the work that he does. But I don't think that necessarily kind of follows through to the staff that are there. I think that there's more work that needs to be done in that area. There's a way in which I think it was interesting for us, and for me in particular, in that moment, to allow something kind of play out, to actually see the ways in which racism could be enacted, because I think to go into a particular space like that and think about the history of a particular black man, forgetting who so it was David Harewood, the actor, wasn't it? There was a specific exhibit about kind of Harewood, to say, enjoy yourself. And I think that there were several moments in which we were told to kind of enjoy ourselves, and the language of that really quite inappropriate, because I think that this is a space in which we are kind of to kind of learn and to educate ourselves, and to approach this space with a bit more kind of respect and reverence. So I mean, I think the personal moments of interpersonal racism don't kind of impact me actually as much as the more kind of structural elements that I think that needs to be a lot more work, a lot more kind of education around. And yeah, yeah, I don't know if you want to say any more, Rachel.
Yeah, maybe just to add that I think it speaks to the performativity of anti-racism. I think someone has maybe put it in the chat as well, that about how it's seen as a tick box exercise of, oh, we need to look like we're thinking about these things, but actually we don't want to do the work ourselves because that requires taking some accountability, working through it every single day. It's not a 1 hour workshop or a 1 week workshop that you need to do. It is something that you have to do for the rest of your lives. And when people realize that, I think they don't want to do that, and they want to look good and need to be seen to be doing something. So that's what it very much felt like with this exhibition. We were excited to see it, but it didn't actually grapple with empire and the legacy of where this house earned its money from. What it actually talked about was David Harewood's life, his acting, his struggles with psychosis, which is a very important topic. Mental health and mental well-being is absolutely important, but it was badged as talking about his family having been enslaved on the plantations and talking about bringing to life the legacy of colonialism and slavery and the ways that this house and the family had benefited from it. And when it didn't talk about that, you could see that performativity, and you could also see the performativity in the way it was a temporary exhibition. It was on for maybe 2 months, I'm not sure of the exact date, and the ways that it was at the beginning of the house. And then when you left that exhibit, you were back to the house proper, quote unquote, where you saw the Chippendale furniture, the references to the Lascelles family, pictures of the royal family. You returned to the grandeur, and you were just given many moments to forget any important messages that you may have learned or should have learned. You were told to now enjoy the house. You know, this is the countryside home, and okay, it's got a past history, but that's dark, but we're leaving it in the past. We're going to look at the grandeur. And I think a lot, if we're thinking of country homes, a lot of country homes are guilty of doing that. They want to be able to say, I've mentioned the legacies, and I want to say that we've mentioned racism, but also we still want to be here as places to enjoy, because they're seen as the epitome of the rural idyll, and these beautiful country homes, quote unquote, spaces that we're supposed to enjoy, not reckon with. Yeah, so that's what I'd add.
And I also see the same in, for example, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's recent statements when he was asked by heads of states who are attending the Commonwealth meeting or summit that just took place, where Starmer and other officials in his government were saying that they don't want to talk about the past. They don't want to apologize for slavery. They don't want to, they don't want to pay reparations. They want to keep the past in the past and focus on the future. What are your comments or thoughts on this, and also what this says about the work that needs to be done around dismantling racism, basically? Or do you believe that it should be dismantled?
Well, 100%, I believe that it should be dismantled, and I think that our country houses and the kind of colonial history that is attached to them are ways in which we can really kind of engage and enrich people's knowledge and understanding of this, this very kind of sinister past that the British has had. So I do actually see colonial history as playing a kind of key part, and I think that for me, actually, knowing that when I kind of go to these places, that the idea that people of color don't actually kind of belong here becomes a kind of nonsense, because of ways in which Britain and other kind of colonial powers have gone to different, different parts of the world and exploited and, extracted and enslaved. And yeah, I just think that those kind of spaces are our spaces as well, and we have we have a kind of connection to them. And this is something that I'm kind of seeing that yeah, a lot of black and brown folk are saying and kind of recognizing. So yeah, that's one answer I could give you.
How about you, Rachel?
Yeah, I think if I take the point about the politicians, I think it's complicity, isn't it, in racism, and it's allowing racism to endure the ways that they are, refusing to take accountability, trying to couch it with, well, we're leaving that in the past and we're ignoring the ways that a legacy of slavery and colonization is both still happening, but the ways it has manifested as privilege for a select few. It would mean giving up that privilege, giving away power. Obviously, they don't want to do that. It would mean having to admit the work that they need to do and that we all need to do as white people to break down these racist and white supremacist structures. And I think the way it works is to show the endurance of racism within our country. It's giving other people a permission to hate and hierarchize too, when our leaders are saying, we're not racist, we don't need to think about the past, that's in the past. Britain welcomes everyone, we're not a racist country. It's the narrative that's coming through a lot of the conversations I've been having with both racialized and minoritized ethnic individuals and white individuals who are working through racism and trying to be anti-racist, is that permission to hate that's trickling down from the top to say it's okay to be racist because you're white and you get to stay on top, and the past is the past. It's just another tool in a whole army of tools in order to reinforce that point.
Thank you. And we turn to you, people who are listening in. Do you have any questions, comments, responses, reactions, suggestions? If you just unmute and let us hear you.
Well, I want to say thank you both for the presentation. And obviously, much of what you say are things that we kind of know, but it's good to hear them being researched and examined. And certainly for me, as African from the Caribbean, with the history of enslavement, the torture, the terrorism. I mean, when I read books, I'm damaged constantly. Just a couple of years ago, we began to learn about the genocides conducted on the Namibians by the Germans, what the Belgians did in the Congo, and what continues to happen in the Congo to this day. We are damaged continually by this terrorism against our people for nothing more than the stealing of our resources and so on, for the benefit of other people, and the collaboration that is actually expected from the leadership in these countries. When people stand up in these countries, like Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara from Burkina Faso, they are murdered. And so when we're trying to move out of the systems to create something better, the same people who are damaging us prevent it from happening. Then they criticize the leadership for being this and that and the other. And, if there is going to be change, people have got to be serious. We're not blind, we're informed, we're educated people. We can research and find out for ourselves what has happened. Why? I mean, if you look at the conditions for some of the young Black men in this country, this legacy is what is creating some of the pain and damage that they are now putting out there in the society. So if we really want change, then things have got to be very serious and meaningful. And this pretense that we didn't, I mean, apartheid, do you know, I just don't even know how these people who claim to be leaders and who claim to be informed and educated have the nerve to stand up and have no conscience about this legacy. It is an absolute disgrace, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nzinga. Is there someone else who wants to also say something?
I just wanted to point out another example of what happened to Vijay. When you and Rachel visited that country house, you'd been invited there in order to, I guess, take part in an anti-racist initiative in the form of that exhibition, and yet 3 different times experienced racism on the way to the exhibition. He didn't even arrive yet, yes, and already encountered the hypocrisy of the performative nature, basically, of the supposed anti-racism that was taking place. Something similar happened to Zafir Hakim, who is a former equality development officer, who experienced racism whilst he was while he was hired to bring equality within an organization. And when he brought a discrimination claim about the racism he had experienced, he was sacked. And, you know, it went to court, and eventually I understand that there was some type of compensation. Point being, this type of thing happens often. Performative allyship, performative anti-racism. It's all about aesthetics rather than substance. And I think it's just very important that you mention that and you give voice to your experience there. That's a very important thing to do, to give voice to every single race's experience that anyone experiences or indeed sees, witnesses. To let it go unvoiced is to normalize it, to say it's okay. There's no problem here, as it were, of which we know there's plenty of problem. And it just really, I guess, emphasizes quite a famous quote from Black American writer Zora Neale Hurston, who said, "If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it." Yes. So I just want to thank you for not being silent, for undoing the silence, as it were, and putting that out there. It's very important to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abiodun.
Oh, and just to let you know, in the chat box, I also shared a link to an article that tells you more about Sophia Hakim's experience, in addition to other racist incidents as well. So there you go.
Thank you, Abiodun. And then we hear from Joseph and Jill before we get a response from Rachel and Viji.
As there are pertinent questions I've always asking about, Americans cannot always blame the West for our woes. Yes, regarding racism, the transatlantic slavery, I think we should bear in mind that it wasn't just the West that was involved in racism. The Arabs were. We're not asking the Arab countries to pay us reparations. And Africans themselves were complicit in the transatlantic slavery. And talk about the genocide. Yes, I heard Mrs. Nzinga talk about the genocide in Namibia by the colonial Germans, the atrocities committed by the Belgians. That's King Leopold II of Belgium against the Congolese. Yes, is downplayed in history. Is downplayed. In fact, the Jewish Holocaust is much more talked about than these atrocities. But we shouldn't also forget the atrocities, committed by Africans against Africans, like the genocide in Rwanda. Who pays the Tutsis for the crimes against humanity orchestrated by the Hutus? These are very pertinent questions. We as Africans need to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Now, with Joseph's question, perhaps what we could do is we could start with a response from Zinga and Abiodun, and then we hear from our speakers on the same.
Sorry, because of the connection, I actually didn't really hear what Joseph had said there.
I mean, I can speak to the part that Joseph was speaking about. We don't downplay any genocide, no matter where it is committed. But you can't fight all the battles in one go. So you have to prioritize the areas that you're going to tackle. And certainly for me, as part of the Pan-African movement, we are tackling what has continued to hinder us in the Caribbean and even here in the UK. I came here as a child of 7 years old. I'm 73, so I've lived here the whole of my life. When we came here, they used to chase us down the streets, woggy, nigger, blackie, and you'll be in Notting Hill, they massacred Kelso Cochrane for no reason other than the fact that he lived in that area as a black man. So we can't fight everything. Some of the people on the continent need to be tackling those governments that they live under and challenging the oppression and exploitation. But we here in the West are fighting the West for what we call is justice. The United Nations have a program called the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, which is supposed to create a forum whereby those who have wronged African descendants in the diaspora make efforts to mend some of that damage, and they've done absolutely nothing about it. So it's not a case of ignoring this or that. It's a case of you can only tackle so much in one go, and that's where we are.
Thank you, Nzinga. And then we hear from our two panelists.
Yeah, I wanted to thank everyone there for their contributions. They really add value to our work and the different issues that we all need to be reflecting on and be reminded of and be held accountable to. I think one of the things that I'm really conscious of is being a white person on a project looking at racism. And so one of the things that I always appreciate is people trusting me, trusting the project to share their stories of racism when I am a person who can perpetrate racism as a white person. And I think that's the reason why I try to work so hard on this project, to be reflective of that. And in my own life is to think, well, what are the ways that I can challenge that within myself and within other people? Because I think growing up, as I said at the beginning, in a white rural environment, if we're thinking about rurality, but all of these issues spill out into the urban and they spill out into the international as well. What is it that I can do to help bring other white people on a journey of anti-racism? And I think there is a role for white people to play in that. I think we have to. I think we can't do what Keir Starmer does, for example, and say, let's leave it in the past. It's not our problem, because it is our problem and there is a problem here and I have a responsibility as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing your stories. And I think that that's why I wanted to share my motivation as well for this project, because I think it helps keep me accountable to the work that needs doing. Viji, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add reflection-wise.
No, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today, for contributing in person and online. I mean, I think when I think about the project that we're kind of engaged with, it does intersect with other movements and other struggles that are going on elsewhere in the world. And I think that what we're doing, is important. there's a way in which university research can be very extractive, and I wouldn't actually deny that there is a certain amount of extraction that is going on even within this project. But what I'm also sure about is the fact that we are, working to be cognizant of that, and to to put something back, give something back, to the people that have to the racialized people that have contributed to this study. Racism is real. It is something that is felt in the body mind. It does pathologize. I think that to the people that say, and it is a constant kind of refrain, that there is no racism here. Well, it is. And, we are living with it every single day. And, I think that the more people that, if we can encourage, more people to kind of stand up and say, there is a problem here, and we want to be kind of part of the solution, then it just feels very, very important. It feels very important at this particular moment of post-raciality, that our government is also kind of perpetrating, in the examples that have been given, that we stand up and confront that. So yeah, but thank you all anyway. I've enjoyed and appreciated being in this space with you. So yeah, and thank you, Ambrose, for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Viji and Rachel. We've also got comments from Sue and Jill and Joe, as well as Bronnie and Lou. And Anne, do you want to speak to your comments, to the comments that you made in the chats? If you just unmute and let's hear you.
To ask Viji and Rachel, great work that you're doing. I can understand in the moment when you were at Harewood House the instances of racism and your difficulties. Have you since reflected on if you had that time again, what you would do, or if the same sort of thing happens, would you do differently, or have you? Yeah. About the volunteers.
Maybe before you answer that question, Viji, let's hear from the others who put comments.
Yeah, no, sure.
And then we come back to you.
I wanted to say thank you so much. And I've put in the information about LGBT History Month, and we've been working to do something very similar to you around enabling museums and National Trust houses and everything else to be inclusive of LGBT plus people in all their diversity. I mean, we have been passionate from the beginning to say that we're not just gay white men. So we have been totally inclusive from the word go, and having experienced not unsimilar things with the total hiding of LGBT people with the most wonderful coding. So people are friends or they're secretaries, or so the relationships of those people have been forgotten. But I do think that the Heritage Months, the Southeastern Heritage Month, Black History Month, LGBT History Month, have given those places a tool to start doing some of the uncovering and visibilizing of the hidden minorities and even majorities of those of us in the country. So we are giving them tools, and we are giving them ways of being inclusive of us. And sometimes they do it very heavy-handedly. But at least it's a start, and we can go in and we can educate and we can enable them to do it better next time. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's painful when it's clumsy.
Thank you. I think there was another speaker.
Can I just jump in a minute? and say, I think what's missing occasionally is the co-production, is asking the people who are directly affected. So often you go to a country house or an event and the anti-racism work has been done to people, not by people and with people. And it would be wonderful if there was more co-production and more of a lived experience voice than a team of people putting together an exhibit on someone's behalf without even asking for how that experience might be for someone else.
Thank you. How about you, Lou?
My apologies.
And also Joe?
Yeah, I know. I think it's been a wonderful discussion. I've learned a lot. You know, I moved to the UK not too long ago, and I've been in London. I haven't really visited most of the rural sites. There's been expressions of racism I've experienced, but I wouldn't say it's not been very explicit in that sense of the word. So, I mean, this discussion has been rather eye-opening for me, and yeah, I've learned a lot rather from it. Thank you.
Okay. So maybe we go back to you, Rachel and Viji. How do you respond to what we've just said?
Yes, thank you again, everyone, for your questions and contributions. I think if I take a moment to speak about what Jill said, I think and please correct me if I've mispronounced your name there, I think that's right. I think that's important. I think we cannot pretend to know more than someone with lived experience. And I think collaboration is so key to all of these movements. We cannot, it's just another way to utilize your own privilege and power, isn't it? If you profess to supposedly know more than someone with lived experience. And I think it's a journey that we all need to go on together with people with lived experience and expertise. And then us white folk need to do the journey to being anti-racist and to dismantling our racism off the basis of what racialized others and minoritized ethnic individuals are telling us about our racism. And like I said, it needs to be a collaborative effort. And if I do just quickly respond to what Bruni said as well about Harewood House and our experience walking through the house, we have reflected on that, because I think, as I said at the beginning, the tension we were talking about was, do we watch this play out as autoethnographic researchers in order to capture an authentic experience of racism, but then Viji has to be the one to experience that racism? Or do we stay true to our values and I call that person out, and in that moment we didn't, we wanted to capture racism and it was harmful for Viji and it shouldn't have had to happen in order to capture research. And I think that speaks to the ways that research re-traumatizes people, even through just having conversations in interviews. And I think reflecting upon it, I don't think we'd want to repeat that. I mean, I can't speak to Viji and your experiences and your thoughts, but I think for myself, this is now 6 months down the line on, the one enduring thought I have had was that was a moment for me to take a white person to one side, or several white people, as it was different people, and talk about their racism and how we can dismantle racist structures and microaggressions and stereotypes and abuse together. And we missed that opportunity in order to capture a racist experience. So yeah, I think I wouldn't want to do it that way again. I think I'd want to use it as a learning opportunity to dismantle racism. But yeah, Viji, I'll leave you to respond as well to everyone. And thank you again, everyone, for your contributions and for being here.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting and a generative discussion. Yeah, with the Harewood House situation, of course, I think that it was a strategic at that moment, in my mind anyway, to let that play out. See how you know, incidents like could, you know, pervade the experience of Black and brown and Asian folk that visit this place. So I think it was important. There was a validity in doing that. I think there's also a validity in actually having a conversation with Harewood House about that experience, and we've spoken about that. We've spoken about how we intend to write to them and inform them of our kind of experience. So I think that that's important. I think the way in which we speak about racism to people, I think that taking someone to one side and having a conversation with them, not in a way that seeks to kind of belittle them, but in a way that perhaps makes that kind of human connection that speaks perhaps to the kind of damage that these moments, situations, and processes can impact on racialized others. That on that point, that's that thing. In terms of the LGBTQ plus histories. I think about all of these things, the queer history, I think about disabled history, I think about black and brown histories, and I think actually there's intersections that need to be made here because they're not all in boxes. Black people are also queer people, they're also disabled people, and so that what we also, I think, need to kind of see more. In terms of the co-production, I think that more work definitely needs to need that kind of co-production is really kind of powerful and important that in the context of the work that we're doing, that the communities of color can speak and that they can represent the work that we as kind of university researchers that have the salaries and kind of privilege that go with that type of kind of employment that that other people are able to to articulate their own views about particular projects and the way that it impacts on them. So yes, there we are.
Thank you. Maybe this is a penultimate question because I'm mindful that we are a bit over the time.
And I've got another meeting, so yeah.
Yeah. How much time do you give us?
A few more minutes.
Okay.
I'm not just going to run.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Rachel might, but I'll stay for a moment or two. But yes.
Okay. So my question was going to be, it goes back to the mention that you made of refugees and asylum seekers and also the countryside. Maybe if you could say something about the view that you have on the connection between how refugees and asylum seekers are being treated right now in Britain and colonialism, empire, neocolonialism, and slavery.
From my experience of being in rural spaces and speaking to people in these rural spaces that are working with asylum seekers and refugees, I would say that actually it's horrific. It is really, really bad. I mean, I read you something of that kind of poem that is the very kind of tip of the iceberg, and I think the violence enacted against asylum seekers and refugees, is huge. But I also think that this is actually coming from politicians and from kind of ideology, and that has a long history of being overrun, of being invaded, of not really kind of understanding the context of why people are seeking sanctuary. Do you know, and the part of Britain within all of that, in a place like Portland, for example, and also in a place like West Cumbria, so in places, I don't know, like Barrow, these are poor kind of coastal rural communities in which resources are scarce, and the discourse that comes from the government, from the media, from schools, from families, is that these people are somehow, they're enriching themselves, and that they're getting, lavish accommodation and money from the state, and this is clearly not true. And so it is these deceptions that are being kind of practiced, that really are having a very kind of damaging effect on the psyche and soma, I think, of asylum seekers and refugees in this country. And we need to speak back against all of that. And I think, it's about re-educating and talking to people about the amount of money that you actually get. It's not £1,000, it's not £1,000 a month. No one's paid £1,000 a month. Do you know, it's saying, well, actually, if you are in a HMO, then you're going to get, I don't know, I think that it's £49 a week, but it's really to understand what is actually going on at this moment, and that to unveil the kind of lies that are going, because people are being hurt in these processes. So yeah, like that.
Thank you. How about you, Rachel? Is there anything you'd like to add on the connection between the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees and the histories that you are looking at?
Yeah, I think Viji summarized it really well, and I think it's a case of what has worked well in the past to marginalize and control is still working today. I think it's a tactic that they are just using in a different way on slightly different communities and slightly different directions, and it's a scapegoating of communities, of othered communities, of marginalized communities, that works so successfully to manifest and to support and to promote racism within white English and white British people. It's to say, these others that we're othering, so these asylum seekers and these migrants, are stealing your jobs, are stealing your homes, are stealing your money. It's a scapegoating tool in order to divide and conquer and rule, because if you divide, then people can't rise up and protest against the discrimination and the marginalization that is happening. And I think it's been so successfully used because of what previous governments and the current government, the political system that they have created and the economic situation they have created, but they don't want to be held accountable for. It's an easier way for them to continue to retain power, because all our governments are just successive forms of white middle classness. I know that our previous prime minister was not white, but he was in many ways, in the ways he held on to power and didn't devolve it to marginalized communities. And it's a really successful tool for them to do so. So they will continue to do so until we challenge that. And I think that's sort of what Viji summarized really well.
Thank you very much. So, and this is going to be my final question. In all that we have said, is there anything that you would like to add or emphasize? And also, what are your hopes? And then maybe we finish on a note of hope.
Yeah, I think hope probably is the message that I want to emphasize. And I don't mean that by undermining the very lived realities of racism, of division, of marginalization that we're seeing in England and the world over. I think it's so important that we do give voice to those experiences. But I think within that, there is a kernel of hope in the work that we are all doing in being present here today, that people are doing in other ways, that they're not necessarily, you don't need to shout it from the rooftop, do you, with this work? It can be the small everyday ways people are fighting to undo marginalization, to break down racism, to break down white supremacy, to break down capitalism. And I think we're seeing that, and we have captured that in the work, and we've not been able to properly speak about this today. And if anyone does want to hear more about it, we'd be very happy to speak on that another time. But there are ways that the allies and communities of colour are pushing back and fighting for the right to belong and the right to be connected and to take up space in rural spaces. And there are ways that white people are also trying to fight for that as well. And I think the more of us there are that are doing that, the more powerful this movement will be.
How about you, Viji? Is there anything you'd like to add, emphasize?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just like to reiterate what Rachel has said really about activist groups, grassroots organizations, that the mantle really is being taken up by people of color themselves that are organizing, that do see a great benefit from being in rural spaces on their body minds. There is a very healing energy that that comes from being in these spaces, despite the tenacity of racism. And people of color recognize that, and they want that. And they demand that now. And it's no longer sitting at home and waiting for it to be done. It's they are organizing, we are organizing, and we are doing it. And we are doing it for ourselves. And I think part of the great for me in this work that has been difficult at times is to kind of go out with Black, brown, Asian, and white people, white allies, and experience the natural world. So, I think that there is cause for hope and optimism, and I think that a space like this is part of Hope's work. So, I thank you very much, Ambrose, for curating and facilitating this space. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So on this note, I say thank you very much to our two speakers, Dr. Rachel Keighley and also Dr. Viji Kuppan, and also to you who have joined this session and conversation. The conversation continues at 4:30 p.m. when we meet poets Lorraine Masiem Ponela and Dadirai Tsopo, who will be talking about what asylum seekers and refugees make of far-right violence in the UK. So on that note, I say thank you and see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.